Here we are live with the Rare Network podcast number 15. And this is an amazing one. We've got Marcel, the deputy CIO of Coinbase Asset Management. Thank you for coming on, Marcel. It is great to be with you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Can you give everybody a little introduction of, what your title is at Coinbase Asset Management and kind of what that role is?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on the asset management side. We're very much focused on building institutional grade products for investors within the crypto ecosystem. So we're taking, just picture all the tools that you've learned in traditional markets. We're importing the knowledge of those tools, rebuilding the architecture, and then delivering what we hope to be very interesting products on the investment side tied to digital rails. So we have things like a trend strategy, a credit strategy, an index strategy, things of that nature, exploring option strategy. So we've done a lot of work. I like to joke we have a Ferrari during crypto winter. We built a Ferrari that's sitting in the garage, and we open the garage every day and we rev it and we think, oh, we're ready to drive this thing. So we are definitely ready to drive this thing. It's all very impressive work.
That's amazing. Before we get into the news that breaks, I kind of want to dive into your background. You've done some amazing stuff and would love to kind of know like your upbringing a little bit of your background, what your educational upbringing was before kind of getting into crypto.
It's the unamazing stuff that defines us, right? The
Yeah.
places where we fall down, the places where we stand up are the fun parts. It's like training for a marathon. That no one's cheering you when you're training. Um, my background, my first love was mathematics. I thought that was my meal ticket out of a smaller town, and then I met pure mathematicians and thought, oh, need a new plan. So I loved it. I loved it, but I was definitely not going to compete in that space, and still to this day I have a preoccupation with that area. I really think it gets you closer to the truth. So then I migrated over to like any failed mathematician, you hunt things down in social sciences. So studied a lot of finance. Ended up starting my career at the Bank of Canada. Did a lot of interesting things there. It was a lot of fun. Special situations group. Spent time at Goldman. What a remarkable learning experience, and have many friends from there still to this day. Then probably the biggest inflection point in my career was working at Soros Fund Management, and I worked very closely with George Soros himself, and that was boy, oh boy. I mean, in dog years, it was a handful of years, but there was so much going on, including China revaluation and financial crisis, and peak oil and all of these things that were happening. It was really, really just a remarkable experience. You couldn't replicate it. You couldn't ask for a better education and training ground, and we did very, very well in that period. Started up 2 macro hedge funds with peers and partners, both of which were very successful in terms of asset raising. And delivering alpha to investors, and then joined One River Digital in 2021. And that was my foray into crypto. I started goofing around in crypto while I was a visiting scholar. It's probably if you ever needed evidence of title inflation, they couldn't pay you, but man, you got a great title. I was a visiting scholar at the IMF, and I stumbled across an article on crypto, and that's how I started just plugging away at it, and it ended up being a dominant portion of my portfolio, not by virtue of price move. So I just kept digging into the asset class, and I tackle it from a macro perspective, which is my background. We have a remarkable team in place that tackles it from all sorts of different angles. So it's a very eclectic team and a remarkable set of diversified human capital assets that are being utilized to deliver these investment products. So it's a ton of fun. We're having a grand time.
Yeah, you guys are building some amazing stuff. I can see in your history, like the depth there that you were able to mention, like Bank of Canada to Goldman to Soros. Like you've really seen the financial side of how things are built. Like during all that time when you found, crypto, what were your thoughts like the first time you found blockchain? Was it Bitcoin? Was it
Bitcoin.
ETH? It was Bitcoin first.
Yeah, it was around 2012, 2013, Bitcoin. Look, frankly, I didn't understand it.
Mhm.
I was intrigued. I thought the science articles were excellent. I thought they did an excellent job of delivering it in a way that I could digest it. And they were basically calling it the future of money. And I just struggled with it. I just struggled to really understand. I'm like, okay, what problem does it solve, right? And I just kept an open mind and kept digging. Now, I understood the financial plumbing of the traditional system fairly well, which I think helped me a lot because look, to understand financial plumbing of the traditional system, you have to be an ultra nerd. This stuff is not, this will put a baby to sleep, right? This is like, I find it a ton of fun. So if anyone wants to dive into that stuff, I'm always happy to do it. The details are always in the footnotes. So if you had the patience to go through that kind of stuff, you probably had the patience to figure out how Bitcoin or blockchain technologies would integrate into the financial system. And it took me a long while. Probably took me half a decade to get there. And that helped a lot because then I could see the problem that it solved. And I could then all of a sudden leap forward. Now, the problem was by the time I'd figured it out, then you had all this other stuff happening. And I was like, oh, I'm 10 years behind, right? So I've spent all this time getting, and I don't know if I would have called myself a Bitcoin maxi. I didn't know any better, right? So then it was, by the time it was time for me to be like, come up for air, I'm like, okay, I think I have a handle on this. They're like, what about Ethereum? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me. So it's,
I feel like we all go through this though.
that took me a lot of time. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So anyways, we figured it out. So it was and look, and that's the beauty of the space, right? If you're naturally curious and you're not afraid to fail and you're just honest about stuff, I think be skeptical, all those things. It's just remarkable. And the community is incredible. If you need help understanding stuff, there will be a network of people that will help you get there. As long as you have an open mind. If you're just grinding them down for sport, obviously they're going to throw you out with the bathwater. But if you're genuinely willing to learn, there's an army of people that are happy to get you up that curve, and it's really lovely.
Yeah, 100%. Especially now, going through the full bear market, the people that are left, we've gotten rid of most of the hype junk, and the people that are left here are willing to educate and want to see people come on board and show them actually cool things. I think is really cool about the position we're at right now, going back into the bull market. So like as you found crypto, and you're running these funds, like what made you kind of like dive into the ETH side of things and DeFi and kind of go down this route? What kind of excited you?
I tell you, so we were working on credit. Credit naturally takes you to DeFi. And again, we just kept pulling threads. And what we ended up focusing on was conservative. And look, and we introduced a lot of unique. We introduced very strong institutional standards on how we underwrote loans, which we're really proud of. We suffered no losses in 2022, for example.
Wow.
There are characteristics of credit that are so unique. So as you dig, this is where it's a ton of fun. As you dig into things, you say, okay, what happens to credit spreads in the crypto space on over collateralized loans when the market's crashing? They come in, not out. Think of every other piece of credit paper on the planet. It does the opposite, right? It's pro-cyclical. Or the spreads are counter-cyclical. Credit's pro-cyclical. So equity market up, spreads tighten, vice versa. Crypto is the opposite. Why? Because it's all driven by the demand side. So when is there demand for capital, right? There's demand for capital when prices are high. And when are people willing to pay a higher cost of capital? When their return expectation is higher. So you end up with credit spreads widening in a bull market because the return on capital is rising and the cost of capital is moving with it because it's all driven by the demand side, right? Whereas on traditional credit, it doesn't behave that way at all. So now all of a sudden you create this credit thing that's boring as the day is long, that fits in beautifully to a traditional portfolio with unique risk characteristics. So then these are the things we were playing around with. So that was our preoccupation, not on how do we get a 32% return. Now the pressure that we were getting from the community was how do we get a 32% return, right? And we're like, okay, how do you get a 32% return? So you pull the thread and you're like, yeah, that's not institutional. You can do that PA, right? If you want to just understand how all of this stuff works and you want to play around with it and do some yourself, by all means, super smart. That's how you're going to learn. You're going to get your battle scars, but you'll be like, I'll never forget that, right? So
I feel like that's me.
Everyone. How else do you learn, right? How else do you learn, right? You just can't be afraid of. There's no such thing as failure. They're all lessons, right?
I call it life's tuition is what I paid. I would have paid it to a college. I just paid it in my own learning experience.
That's right. And you get enough reps in that, and then all of a sudden you check your ego at the door, and all these things that you look at how kids are brought up these days, and you'll experience this over the next 20 years, because I know you have one on the way. You look at how kids are brought up, and there's not only a fear of failure, it's somehow if you're not a 4.0 and then you can't go to the right school, and you can't, that's all nonsense. That can't be the right way to do it, right? You're going to learn through your mistakes, right? Then the key is admitting them and all these other things. And that takes time. So the more reps you get sooner, the faster you're going to get comfortable with learning. And that's what it's all about, right? So doing it on your own, but at the institutional level, we determined it was not ready. And that was our starting point. So as we were sitting around the table, we were like, okay, what would it take for it to be ready? Then crypto winter hits, and we're like, okay, we have a window to build. So so what are we going to build? Effectively what we did is, I took the pen mostly. So I was like, okay, I'll make sure that people know we're still alive. We're going to write a lot. We're going to communicate in measured tones. No drama. So I took the pen on the research side a lot. We have a couple of portfolio managers that we're building out both credit and trend, and they're doing just a remarkable job. That infrastructure is non-trivial to build. It's not just that I'm a TradFi person. I'm going to do this. I'm going to flip a switch. Now I'm going to function in digital. It's not how it works. I mean, it's a totally different food group, from a risk characteristic, from a build characteristic. So we've got that done. The index ran out of sample. We've run our index out of sample for 2 years, which has been great. We did some things in the background that we're now kind of bringing to the outside world because the timing's better. So introducing a broad index, for example, all that's done with the highest of institutional standards. So super proud on that side. But on the DeFi side, that was the interesting one, because we're like, okay, we're going to build some infrastructure, and what are the principles that we want to build around? And effectively, it was to say we're going to give an olive branch to the regulators to say, you can be the permission layer. You can define the permission layer, and then we're going to do everything else on the public blockchain. So you want to call that a private blockchain? Fine. But we're going to work with regulators to get that permission layer bulletproof. And then you can see it in the long term. Where do you end up in the long term? As you and I enter that ecosystem, we're going to have it automated. Right now, it's going to be very manual. In the future, we're going to have some automated mechanism where they say, Marcel Kasumovich, here are 50 different sandboxes you can play in, and here are 20 you can't. So then I'm going to have a menu. I'm like, okay, here's where I can play by regulatory status. And if you're American, you're going to come into the regular, and you can't play in anything, right? They'll be like, you're out. You got to go home and watch TV.
That was going to be one of my questions. Yeah.
Go home and watch TV. There's a game on. I jest. That'll change too. I totally understand why American would be lagging. So that was kind of the principles that we built around. So things like privacy is paramount, but anonymity is a non-starter, right? These are very tricky issues, right? Because this is philosophically very difficult issue. But we're like, you can't scale into the regulatory mainstream with anonymity. It just won't fly, right? So then, but privacy is paramount. It's not. And privacy is at risk anytime information stored and all of these things, but it's still there are principles around privacy that we should appreciate. Will hopefully survive us in our time here. So those are the small things that we were very attentive to as we were building, and then we did it.
Did you guys get linked up with like Coinbase? And I know you're building on Base. Is that a separate story, or
it's a great story
in one?
It's a great story. I'll tell it as it was rather than how I could. Right? It's one of those things where ex post you can. It's like anything. Like if you were to look at my time when really good things happened in your career, and I could tell the story in a way that flattering, or I could tell the story the way it kind of, right? And then you'll be like, okay, so you have to be good to get lucky. You got to be engaged. You got to work your tail off. And the way I would think of it, I've used this line often recently, but the opportunity is subtle. People think it's going to thump at your door, like, let me in. I'm an opportunity. No. It's a gentle knock at 3 a.m. when you're in deep sleep, and you're like, is that something? And it's like, oh yeah, it's something. Do you want to answer the door or not? Right? So opportunity is very subtle. So we were fortunate enough to be acquired by Coinbase. We had an excellent working relationship. We were lucky enough to be acquired by Coinbase. It's an amazing platform. I've been a client for probably longer than all but a handful of employees, to be fair. So it's I'm thrilled that that's the case. Like, you couldn't ask for a better platform to build on. We're building this thing, Project Diamond. Before it was called Project Hamilton. God knows what we called it before. I'm sure we had some bad names, but Project Diamond is where we settled, right? We have some fun music videos that I'm building around this that I don't think will see the light of day, but internally it'll be a lot of fun. And
Oh
so
man, maybe a rare Evo after party.
could be. So we're building Diamond, and then Base comes up. You know, Base had this big rollout in the summer, on
Hmm.
chain summer, which was brilliantly done. I mean, I was just playing around. I have a oh, apologize. I have a little monkey on my phone. I was going to show you, but the phone's right. I have a little monkey on my phone that I acquired during the on-chain summer. So Base has a nice rollout. We need a layer 2 anyways for Diamond, right? Now all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute. We now can integrate into Base as our layer 2, and now you have a complete stack. So think of it as an on-chain marketplace, right? You add in a decentralized exchange. We've been in a leadership position on things like account abstraction. We've been in a leadership position in the context of ZK rollups, how it integrates into this. But you now have a complete stack of on-chain marketplace that allows you to sell, buy assets, allows you to distribute those at an exceptionally low cost, and it scales to cover 8 billion people. I mean, you could do anything on this stack. So how do you scale to 8 billion people? You start with one, right? We got to start somewhere. So we'll start with one. We've done one. There's a video. I can make sure I post it here. But we've done one live transaction. We've received preliminary regulatory approval within ADGM in Abu Dhabi. So we have now a regulatory partner, which has also opened up many doors. So that's kind of the story of how we ended up with this complete stack. Very
I
exciting.
love that. And USTC kind of a part of it as
Oh yeah,
well,
yeah,
kind of tied
of
in
course.
there. Yeah, like really makes it fit really well. I'd love to kind of dive into the Abu Dhabi and like you touched on the US regulatory scene. I know that they're extremely open over there. I myself have been to Dubai twice this year and Abu Dhabi once, and would love to dive into that. Like, what's kind of going on over there? What excitement brought you over there, and how do you see that kind of opening doors and showing the framework to the rest of the world of how this can be done?
You know, I'll tell you, a year ago, I didn't even know what ADGM stood for, and it probably took me a few tries. After a few calls, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to study this. This is serious. And they're only 8 years old, right? As a regulator, when we were building this, it was pre-FTX. I would say that the vast majority of interest was in North America,
Hmm.
and for reasons that are completely understandable. You know, FTX hits and just generally the mood around crypto is very difficult. So it's hard for
Everyone's
a
taking their
large
hands
player.
off.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard for a large player to be a first mover. It just is. You know, I have a slightly different take on the U.S. regulatory side, where I look at it as, you know, they're the natural sector, the natural first mover. Same thing with the utilization of stablecoin being Argentina more than, of course, it makes sense, right? Because it's solving an immediate problem. Whereas in rich countries, it's like future interest and have moats around existing architecture that are very difficult to break. So it kind of makes sense. It shouldn't be a shock. May not be pleasant in the transition, but it's not a shock. So then
Hmm.
as we floated so we wrote a couple of papers, and we were willing to talk to anyone on the regulatory side. And we really clicked with the regulator in Abu Dhabi. And then it was time that we had to figure out, okay, now we have to be here. We need presence on the ground. We need to foster those relationships. We need to understand space and people and capital and all of these things. And that's what brought me here. And I tell you what, getting here was very difficult, right? You can imagine family and colleagues, and everyone's like, you're going where? I'd only been here twice in my life, literally. Didn't know the region very well. And I'll tell you, now that I'm here, I'm so grateful. It's just I'm pushing the limits of my comfort zone in ways that I haven't done in a very long time. So it's amazing. It's really amazing. And it's not to say there's a misconception that somehow it's easier. from a regulatory standpoint. It's not. It's actually very, very demanding, but you just have dialogue. So
Yeah, that makes sense. The
it's just
communication's there.
communication is great. So I can pick up the phone and be like, look, here's what we're looking at. What do you think? Like, does it fit with your strategic priorities? What do we need to do to make sure this is compliant, and so on and so forth? It's just that you have a constant dialogue, and they're technically very good. I mean, they dig in deep, deep. I mean, it's not like, oh, this is neat, a nice shiny new toy. They're like, okay, we need to see the audits, we need to see the test case, we need to do a small transaction with your money, we need to, it's not easy. And nothing worth doing should be easy, right? That's the struggle, is the whole point. So it's been great. It's been I can't say enough about the experience. It's been a blast.
I love that. I really enjoyed my experience over there, and can't wait to go back, to be honest. It was really fun, and I tell everybody back home here in North America, you should really take a trip over there and see what's going on. It's amazing.
Yeah, if you really want to warm yourself to locals, come in July, and they'll be like, all right, this person means business. It's like it's like going to Montreal in January. This person means business. They're braving it. And it's and you'll make it. You'll make it. You'll have any meeting you need. Any meeting you need. Somebody will be around. It won't be that busy. It won't be like Abu Dhabi this week.
That's a really good tip, actually.
Uh-huh.
Come in July, you'll get any meeting you need.
That's right. I tell you, when I was sitting in Ottawa, there weren't too many visitors coming in February. June is very busy. Very busy. Yeah. Anyhow, same thing in Washington. Yeah.
That is awesome. And with the release of this news, Coinbase dropping, it dropped on CoinDesk Finance. I mean, this was a massive article that came out 3 days ago, with the Diamond platform. When does that roll out for public use, and what's the main use case for it, I guess, is really the question there. Is it a debt instrument for borrowing, institutional borrowing and lending, as I read it?
Both good questions. So the steps are like anything, you do one step at a time. The first step is to finalize our regulatory approval. So we have preliminary approval, so we need to finalize that. Every step that we take will be subject to regulatory approval. So it's very much a partnership. So if there are things we want to do, we would have to bring it up. In terms of what it can do, you pick. You want to do IP, we do IP. You want to do food security, we do food security. You want to do a debt instrument, we do debt. I mean, we're dealing in digitally native assets. So it's a little bit different from tokenizing an existing asset. The vision here is we're going to kind of start over, almost like ETFs and mutual funds, right? Mm-hmm. ETFs had characteristics that were a lot better, but they coexisted. And then ETFs started gaining share. So think of it in a similar context. You can tokenize an existing asset and port it over. It's kind of duplicating costs a little bit. Or you can say, well, on higher velocity assets, I'm just going to issue one on chain, and I'm going to issue one off chain. And they're going to be fungible. They're going to have the same QSIPs and same legal rights and both, so they're totally fungible. But I'm just going to learn how digital rails work. So that could be the prototypes that we built initially, just to show our breadth, was a discount note, so debt instrument that just trades without coupon, just trades it it's issued as a discount security, so the coupon is embedded in the appreciation to par. So we've done a discount note. The beauty of using a short-term discount note is that the velocity is very high, so you get a lot of reps. So imagine you have a 3-day piece of paper. Like commercial paper is an average 3-day loan, so you get a lot of reps. It also helps that we have Jay Clayton, the former SEC chair, as an advisor. And when we talked about where we should start, he's like, how about CP? I'm like, hey guys, how about CP? He seems like he knows what he's talking about. So
that makes a lot of sense, though. Like, as I was reading it and I watched the video of the first transaction and it being like a 3-day loan, literally a light bulb went off when you were like, because of this, we get so many reps in and a lot of data. And
and then think of it one additional step. All sorts of natively on-chain companies hold off-chain short-term paper. Stablecoin would be a great example. MakerDAO is another example, right? Now, why do they do it? Because it's cheaper, right? They're like, I don't know, I can buy an on-chain asset. I can buy an on-chain tokenized asset at X basis points, or I can buy an off-chain equivalent at 1/5 of that. So why wouldn't I buy the off-chain one? Now, if they have access to on-chain assets at a cheaper price, which they will, you're filling a gap in the market as well. So it serves two purposes. We fell into the latter one, to be fair. It wasn't our initial thinking, our initial velocity, and then we realized there's a market gap right here that we can close. So that's exciting. We've done clean energy certificates, which is think of it as, so just to demonstrate the breadth. So nuclear energy, if you go to anyone producing nuclear energy, they'll have two numbers. They'll show the kilowatt hours that the energy that is producing and the carbon that it's saved. So those can be automatically turned into a digital asset. They can sit on balance sheet, and then if that nuclear provider wants to sell that asset in the future as an offset, they can do that, right? So we've operationalized that only on testnet. So we presented that earlier as well. So we've operationalized that on testnet only. And then the third one we've done is I call it a Bitcoin bond. You shouldn't call it a bond because it's not a security, obviously, and a bond has a connotation of security. So just take that with a grain of salt. But just in terms of the architecture, you can think of it as a bond-like cash flow. And it's just, again, this hasn't been demonstrated live, even though we've run an out of sample analytic on this for a couple of years now, almost. You're basically taking the cash flows from Bitcoin mining, which is Bitcoin, and then you're turning it into a classic waterfall like a CDO in the old days, right? You have a senior tranche, a mezz tranche, and an equity tranche. So who takes the equity tranche? The person that wants to have leverage to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, probably a hedge fund, right? Because they can delta hedge the option underlying that equity tranche with spot. So you have somebody that's very fast moving like a hedge fund. The senior tranche would be a more traditional finance player that's like, look, I just want to get paid quickly, with a nice spread, obviously, but I want to minimize my credit risk. And then the mezz is somewhere in between. So we've underwritten an example of that out of sample. So those are the three that we've operationalized. But the world's your oyster on this stuff. You can really there is not if you think that the world migrates to digital rails, there's not a single asset that we can't run through this architecture.
That's extremely interesting, especially when you got into like the Bitcoin side of things. I was just at the North American Blockchain Summit. We got to tour an oil and gas field that was getting used to mine Bitcoin. And one of the questions that came up, we were asking is, how are you guys like hedging, the gas in Bitcoin mine here? And they were like selling that future earnings off to investors and things like that. So I think what you're doing is kind of a way for that to actually get executed in the future on chain. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Well, and then you think of where we are in Bitcoin mining now versus 10 years ago, right? It's become far more institutionalized. Well, so does the capital needs to become far more institutionalized too. So this is just a different capital stack. So as it becomes more institutionalized, then you're going to need institutional pools of capital. What I find amazing is that we've taken in commodity equivalents, right? If you think of it in that context, more than 93% of the Bitcoin has been taken out of the ground already. But dollars to donuts, the last 7% is going to dwarf the value of the first 93, right? That's going to be a very, very interesting pathway. So even though you only have, like, you think of it, you have 7% left to go, and you never get there because it's an asymptote, obviously, and you have institutional players are there now. And it tells you a lot about how they look at the forward value of this stuff. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely really picking up steam. Like people are catching on real quick. And like, what are your thoughts on like the ETF approvals coming and things like that?
I think it's important. I think it's an important signal, right? I think the actual execution. So let's go in reverse order. Sometimes it's easier to look at the very long term because you know where we're going to end up. So let's look at the very long term. All these rails are going to be digital, right? That's my bet. Could be wrong, could be right, but I think I'm right. When Visa and PayPal and BlackRock and like these are real, Fidelity, these are real institutions who are like, okay, this stuff is the future. So let's assume it's the future, and you start there. So if that's the future, then then will we have a Bitcoin ETF wrap? Will we have an ETF wrapper around a Bitcoin in the long term? No, you're just going to have common exchanges where you have a bunch of stuff that trades, including Bitcoin, right? So now the ETF is extremely powerful in the transition because A, it signals that institutions want to engage, and B, it could be the vehicle of choice to enter model portfolios. Both of those two things are super important. So I don't think there's anything causal about Bitcoin per se, but I think it symbolizes institutions and regulatory clarity, and those are big, big, big deals. The fact that Larry Fink is now a voice in Bitcoin is amazing. Like, it's just amazing. I'm like, thank God I don't have to go on TV, right? It's like, who do you want to talk to, Marcel Kasumovich or Larry Fink? They're like, yeah, hard pass on Marcel. Let's get Larry on the program. I'm like, this is great. This is great. That's how it should be, right? So it's
No way, we're getting Marcel on the program.
so it's I think it's a I think the signaling is very important.
I love that, and learning a lot from this conversation just as a normal guy out here, not with the financial background, and I think a lot of folks will learn a lot of that too listening to this. But yeah, I think when you put it like that, it is really good for signal of where the industry's going. But at the end of the day, the rails that are being built here, that ETF might not be the best vehicle for investment 10, 20 years from now or whatever.
Yeah, like ultimately it'll just converge, right? And now
Right.
think of it, and then think of it. So what does it do? The same thing that when you first dipped your toes into crypto, you probably bought a little bit of Bitcoin or a little bit of ETH, and you did an ICO or whatever it may be, right? That's exactly what BlackRock's doing, right? They're like, okay, how are we going to learn about the space? We've got to have skin in the game. How are we going to get skin in the game? We're just going to participate. We're going to understand, like the surveillance agreement that they've hopefully secured to break the dam on the ETF side. No, I don't think many people could have done that other than a BlackRock. We tried. Like I tried. We had an ETF application that was rejected. I found the SEC's response to the application to be excellent, which is very different from how people would characterize it. They made my knowledge on what we were doing better. And I was like, okay, that's a win. I mean, I would rather it be approved. I didn't agree with the decision, but when I look in totality of their response to the things we were doing, they were excellent. They weren't average, they were excellent. It was all great. So the knowledge of the folks working on these things is very strong. And now you have an unlock. So it's these are good things. And then you think of, so BlackRock's dipping their toes, and all these folks are just dipping their toes. And they're not dipping their toes because they think it's going away. They're dipping their toes because they want to get wet, right? They're gonna end up in the deep end. They're just gonna jump in, right? That's where they're gonna end up. That's where they want to be, right? They want to go for a swim. They don't want to, they want to run they do a triathlon. They don't want to just get their toes wet. I mean, it's not drinking water, they want to engage. So it's very important. I think that's very important. So we got to help them. We just do. As a community, we have to do our best when traditional players are engaging in the space. We got to do our best to be patient and kind of hear them out.
That's really cool. And so, like, what, with everything you guys are building, I loved how you mentioned earlier, like, there's a difference between being anonymous and privacy and things like that. And I think it is really important to find a middle ground. I talk about it all the time with, like, Welena from Microsoft, who has a similar background, and, would love to get you guys together. That's a talk for another time. But, like, there has to be a middle ground between people that want decentralization and anonymous full control of everything and privacy in our institutions. And I think you guys, with this Project Diamond and everything building on Base, I think you're really showing a great example of that, of how you can work with regulators and build something useful for the whole financial world to use, but also put it on chain where it's decentralized and things like that. And is that kind of the goal you guys were going for, because you guys are leading the cutting edge there for that?
Yeah, very, very, very much so. I mean, it's here's a nice plug for the folks at Coin Center. If you don't know them, they're worth knowing. Peter Van Valkenburg gave testimony to Congress in 2016 alongside Nouriel Roubini. It was very, very well done, and it was one of my unlocks, just watching Peter deliver his views. His partner at Coin Center, which is think of them as a nonprofit in DC, but completely independent, and they care about tech, just how tech integrates. Being agnostic to technology is kind of some of their. If I were to give a founding principle, that would be how I would summarize it. Jerry Brito is also affiliated with Coin Center. He participated in the president's Science and Technology group, and I think it was around 2016 as well. And the transcripts are brilliant. He was the strong proponent of crypto asset markets. Helped me a lot in terms of understanding. And it's as a point in time, from a research perspective, both are worth going back and looking at. Now, I mention them because as you describe these things, Peter Van Valkenburg in particular is very focused on the Constitution. So what are the constitutional rights? So we're not going to rewrite the Constitution around Bitcoin. We're just not. We might, but I'm guessing that's a very, very low delta, right?
Not in my lifetime, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, if we're rewriting the Constitution because something really, really bad's happened, we're starting over. So hopefully that doesn't happen, right? Yeah. So Peter is very, very constitutionally focused, and he shares his knowledge freely, and it's amazing. So when we think about issues like this, like, you definitely have to leverage a broader network than yourself. I'm not an expert on privacy versus anonymity. I don't know exactly what constitutional rights exist in the US versus, UAE versus wherever, right? So you have to lean on a broader network than yourself. And the way we ultimately come out on this stuff is, work within. When I mention the Constitution, it's an easy one because we're not going to rewrite it. So work within the rules that are there, and maybe some need to change, right? But work within the rules. That's the most likely pathway to scalability and broader use cases and broader usability.
I love that a lot. I think, Coinbase and your group specifically, as well as just the broader Coinbase, is really a model for that, and working with regulators and pushing forward to kind of bring this industry forward. I think it's super important. It's why we do our event that we do, to kind of get people mingling in person and actually talking. Like, hey, I'm the guy that does this. Marcel is actually building these things. I'd like to introduce you to him and stuff like that. So I think it's really important, and I love that you guys have taken that path and fallen into it. What do you think is the future for Project Diamond, like coming up in 2024 and beyond? Like, where do you see this going? How do you see it getting used?
We got to start the network. I think that's definitely the all of these things are only as good as the network you build around them. So we're inviting that network. So I think of the tech stack or this marketplace as, look, here are the rails. How do you want to use them? And then our job is to make sure they work the way you need to use them. So ironically, the headline act is going to be the users, right? And then think of it this way: the efficiency that comes out of this is very much on the back office side, but on the front office side, now all of a sudden you've unlocked all this time to then guide your client base or whomever it may be with more precision. So, for example, if I add myself through these regulatory perimeters, there's only one right now, but let's imagine in the future I have 50 of them, and I put myself into this sandbox, and they say, okay, here are the things you can do. It's going to be overwhelming. I'm going to be able to do a lot, and I'll be like, I need help, right? So then all of a sudden, then you still have intermediation. It's not that intermediation goes to zero. It's just that the stuff that we were spending time on dramatically changes, where my value proposition to the person that needs help goes way up, like email did, like all these other tools, like any technology. We're just going to be better at what we do. And then the standard's going to go up like it does in sport. You imagine if the best soccer players or best hockey players or football players today played 50 years ago. I mean, Ronaldo playing in 1952, maybe Pele could give him the run for his money, but I think it would be pretty one-sided, no? So the standards always get higher, and they should always get higher because we get better at doing everything. And that's what I see with the tool. We're going to start, and the key is to start. So we get those people, we build that network, we get some transactions under our belt. You start to generate knowledge around it, but then you really create a vision for the people using it to say, okay, I get it now. I get it.
Who are those like ideal starting clients for right now that you want to bring into the network? do you have any examples of who would be using it to start?
Banks are obvious. You know, banks and
Okay.
non-financial lenders. Those are the most obvious ones. Miners. I mean, look, when we first presented this, as a trial balloon in November. I better get the date. October, at a conference called Superbridge, which was this inaugural one tied to GITEX. It was a lot of fun. It was a really, really interesting event. And that's where we presented the clean energy certificates. The interest level after that was exceptionally high, but it was very broad. Like medical people wanted to talk to us, and food security people wanted to talk to us, and IP people. So we're going to really have to laser in on our focus. I love reps. That for me is going to be critical. So I love the short-term lending, and it fills a market gap. So then you think of, well, who you basically, the buyers of that paper are clear enough. There are a bunch of people on chain who are be thrilled to have that paper, and then the sellers of that paper need to be brought to the system. And I think that is very likely in my mind where a very natural starting point.
Would a start to that be like a compound or like an Aave or something wanting like on-chain
Yeah,
access to those instruments to prove their treasury and things like that, and you're bringing the banking in for them to be
100%.
able to get it on-chain,
Yeah, regulated too. Yeah, yeah,
regulated?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
So yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah,
guys are really building the infrastructure rails for a lot of financial things to happen, a lot of assets to come on
yeah,
chain,
yeah.
and not just like one specific use case. I really love that.
Very, very
It's
broad. Yeah, it's built. It's built to scale from an asset perspective. And the key, we keep coming back to this concept of digitally native assets, because I do think it's very important. You need a complete ecosystem on digital rails, and that's where you're going to get the savings. That's where you're really going to get the bulk of your savings. And look, Base, to be fair, Base is a massive unlock for us too. We needed a layer two either way. So it's very helpful for people to be able to face one counterparty. That's very helpful. So it's very exciting. Look, I mean, a gentleman by the name of Sean Martinek has basically run the project. I've been the cheerleader along the way, but I've helped where I could, which is you try to focus on your value proposition to anything, but it's a very small team has done really great work. And I think of it, and you think of a lot of the great things that happen from an innovation standpoint, they have to be small teams, because you got to be something has to be slightly off for you to be willing to try something like this, right? So you're not going to convince a broad group of people to do it. It has to be pretty narrow, right? And you're like, okay, let's give it a go. So it's been a lot of fun. If you saw the first version versus where we are, I mean, oh my goodness, it's really remarkable, really remarkable.
I'm glad you're going to see 2024's event and not 2022's. Yeah, I understand the small team and the growth. And it hits home very strong, Marcel.
Yeah.
Your writing is absolutely amazing. Would love to share with folks like where can they follow you more specifically and get
Um,
access to your writing? Is it
you're,
LinkedIn? Is it Twitter?
you're welcome to be on the distribution list if that's your thing, through email. Most of what we do ends up on LinkedIn in one way, shape, or another. So feel free to reach out. I haven't, I'm kind of new to the whole social media thing, to be fair. So I started with LinkedIn because it seemed like a little bit sleepy, to be fair. So I was like, all right, I'm going to start with LinkedIn, and it's been very productive. I think I try to respond to every DM. As you know, I can be a little bit slow, but I really try to respond to every DM, even if it's just this isn't for us. And it's been great. I mean, we've broadened our reach as a community, and then been able to then say, okay, I'm definitely the wrong guy for this type of question, but here's the right person, and it's been very productive. But I appreciate the compliment. I give my wife credit for that. My wife and my boss are both amazing writers and editors, but and you're more than welcome to be on those distribution lists.
Yeah, I would personally love to, and I think anybody out there should definitely give you a follow on LinkedIn. I enjoy reading your posts, so they're extremely insightful to what's happening in the industry and your thoughts on that. It's very well written. So
I call it macro mumbo jumbo. We've pivoted to more macro stuff, less micro stuff. So it's yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Yeah, I enjoy.
I love that. I love that so much. As we kind of wrap it up, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think should be hit on here that you want the public to know?
Use cases. You know, if boy, we just got to use these tools. You know, and if it's the fact that PayPal is integrating these and the technologies into their stack, and MasterCard and Visa and BlackRock, and these are all important signals. And I think the way we can make progress is to just use the tools that are available. I know it's fairly narrow right now, like we're talking about mostly payment vessels, but when you see new tools that come out, just invest a little bit of time to play around with it, and then start communicating with people. Be like, this didn't work. I didn't like this. What about this? You know, I think it's very important. I think the more users we can get to play around with this stuff, the faster we can get up the curve on building use cases. And we really need those. And I think that's the real unlock. Capturing people's imagination is the real unlock. So the more people that are playing around with it, the better.
That's really well said. When people ask me, like, where do you get your conviction from this industry, especially with everything in the news that they hear from the outside, it's talking to folks like yourself. It's talking to like FedEx and understanding what they're doing in the use case with, getting packages through customs in all these different countries and needing a decentralized layer. So I
Yeah.
completely agree with that, and love to hear that. It's something that's really needed for folks to kind of go play around and understand the use cases that are getting built one by one. We're still super, super early, but if you dive deep enough, you find folks like yourself and real things getting built that are extremely useful and cut out the noise of the SBFs and
Oh, it's fun
maybe
too. You
crazy
know, it's
launches.
fun. Like when
Yeah.
when new things come out and I can transfer dollars through a wallet via a link, I'm like, it's just fun. You see how quickly can we get this thing done? And then you try to do it on Venmo, or you try to do it on Venmo when you're not signed up, right? And then it's like, oh geez, it's taking, and you're not, it's not that you're saying all these tools are great, but it's like this other one's better. So is it ready for prime time? Not yet. Not yet. But when you're using it, you're like, oh my God, I just sent $5 to somebody via the internet. I've never done
Yeah.
that. Like, true internet, like not through a third. Like when this goes, there's whoever clicks on that link gets my money, right? That's
Yeah.
it. And you know, I've sent funds now, like tiny amounts, like $1, and a lot of them go unclaimed.
Really?
All you have to do is click on the darn link, and then it'll take. If you don't have a wallet, it'll open a wallet for you, right? And you can then sign up, and it takes you 3 seconds to sign up. It's not.
That's a
It's not.
great way to onboard folks too.
Yeah, it is. It's great. So we should be doing this with art. We should be doing it with pins. Like this pin has to be an NFT. No, it can be
Yeah.
worthless NFT, but then you zone in, you click on it, and then you get all my contact details. Right. Every one of my pins should have my business card on it. No, and then it'll be like, oh, how do I get your business card? Well, you download it through, and now that wouldn't be crypto. To be fair, that would just be through a simple QWERTY code. But you could have fun with it. Yeah, yeah.
Get the
Anyway,
point though. That's
use,
really cool.
use cases. Yeah.
Use cases. I'm glad we touched on that. I'm glad we
Yeah.
touched on it. Well, thank you so much for the time, Marcel. It's been an amazing one to wake up to here in America. I'm sure you have a long Friday evening. You guys want to go celebrate after this news dropping and Diamond coming out. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk to the Rare Network, and hope to see you at the event later in the year.
Thank you, sir. Hope so too. Really, really nice chat. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcel.